The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. In the VIP section of the Onyx room, silence was usually a precursor to violence. A terrified busboy had just spilled scalding tea on the most dangerous woman in Chicago, Irina Volkova, the mother of the city's most ruthless mob boss. Guns were drawn. The boy was sobbing. Alexei Volkov, the boss himself, looked ready to execute the kid on the spot, but then a quiet, trembling voice cut through the tension. It wasn't begging for mercy, it was speaking in Russian. And not just any Russian, it was the aristocratic Brighton Beach dialect that hadn't been heard in decades, the tongue of the old immigrant families who fled the Soviet Union in the 1970s. Everyone turned. It was just the girl who cleaned the ashtrays. But what she said next would change the underworld forever. To understand how Katerina Brennan became the queen of Chicago's criminal empire, you need to go back 18 hours. Back to when she was invisible. Back to when survival meant keeping your head down and your mouth shut. Back to the moment before everything burned. November in Chicago felt like the city was punishing you for being alive. The first snow of the season fell in wet clumps on Michigan Avenue, turning to gray slush under 1,000 indifferent feet. Inside the Onyx room, the cold didn't exist. Only heat, the kind that came from money, power, and the ever-present threat of death. The club sat in the heart of the meatpacking district, a cathedral of sin wrapped in velvet curtains the color of dried blood. Crystal chandeliers hung from 20-foot ceilings, each one worth more than Kat would make in 10 lifetimes. The air tasted like Cuban cigars and Chanel No. 5, a combination that made her throat close up every time she walked through the service entrance. Kat adjusted her black apron, the fabric rough against her wrists. She'd bought the uniform 2 sizes too big on purpose. Baggy clothes meant fewer eyes, fewer questions. She kept her brown hair tied so tight it gave her headaches, scraped back into a bun that made her look older, harder, less interesting. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that would make a man look twice. In a place like the Onyx room, invisibility wasn't just a skill, it was a survival mechanism. She moved between tables like a ghost, her movements practiced and efficient. 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Morning shift washing dishes in the basement kitchen, evening shift clearing glasses and ashtrays in the VIP lounge. She'd been doing this for 7 months, and in that time she'd learned the rhythm of the place, the ebb and flow of danger. When to move fast, when to freeze, when to disappear entirely. The memory hit her without warning, sharp and sudden as a knife between the ribs. She was 8 years old again, standing on Brighton Beach Avenue in Brooklyn. The smell of fresh bread from the Russian bakery, her mother's hand warm in hers, fingers interlaced, teaching her the cadence of Pushkin's poetry in the old tongue. You must remember, Katya, Russian is your soul. Don't let it die with me. Then the explosion, the world turning white and red, her mother's blood soaking into the concrete while her father screamed into a phone, calling for backup that would never come fast enough. The smell of burning metal and flesh, the sound of sirens too late, always too late. Kat blinked hard, forcing herself back to the present. Her hands were shaking. She shoved them into her pockets, gripping the edges of the fabric until her knuckles went white. 16 years since Brighton Beach, 8 years since her father died in a federal prison cell, alone and disgraced, framed for crimes he didn't commit by the very organization that now employed her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Working for the Volkov family, the same Bratva network her father had spent his life trying to dismantle. But irony didn't pay for chemotherapy. Irony didn't keep her 19-year-old brother alive. The kitchen door swung open with enough force to rattle the shelf. Rickard, the floor manager, stood in the doorway, his face slick with sweat despite the November cold. He was a heavy man built like a barrel, his shirt perpetually damp under the arms. The smell of cheap aftershave and cigarettes preceded him by several feet. "Vance!" His voice cut through the clatter of dishes. "Mrs. Volkova is coming tonight, 5th anniversary of her husband's death. She wants the traditional service. You screw this up, you're done. No severance, no references, and sure as hell no health insurance for your brother. The words landed like a physical blow. Kat felt her stomach drop, that sick, swooping sensation of freefall. Volkova. She knew that name. Every Russian American in the tri-state area knew that name. Irina Volkova, widow of Dmitry Volkov, the man who'd built an empire on extortion, smuggling, and strategic violence. The matriarch of the family that controlled half of Chicago's criminal infrastructure. The woman whose organization had, allegedly, planted the bomb that killed Kat's mother on Brighton Beach Avenue in 2008. I understand. The words came out flat, mechanical. Kat had learned long ago how to make her voice disappear, how to strip it of anything that might betray emotion. Rickard stepped closer, close enough that she could see the broken capillaries in his nose, the yellowing of his teeth. You understand what's at stake here? Mrs. Volkova doesn't tolerate mistakes. Last year, a waiter dropped a tray near her table. Alexei had the kid's fingers broken, both hands. Sent him home with $100 and a warning. Consider yourself lucky you're getting this shot at all. Lucky, right. Kat nodded again, not trusting herself to speak. Rickard waddled away, already barking orders at the kitchen staff, and she was left alone with a sick weight of dread settling in her chest. She thought about Luca, her baby brother, lying in a bed at St. Jude Children's Hospital. 19 years old but looking more like 12, his body eaten away by acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The doctors had given him 6 weeks without the next round of treatment. 6 weeks, and the treatment cost $50,000 that she didn't have, couldn't borrow, would never earn in time scrubbing dishes and clearing tables. She had $83 in her checking account. The math was simple and brutal. Work tonight, survive tonight, keep the job, keep the insurance, keep Luca alive for 1 more month, then do it all over again. At 8:50 p.m., the front doors open, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kat felt it from across the club, that shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded a storm. The jazz quartet on the small stage faltered for half a beat before recovering, their notes suddenly more cautious, more careful. Every conversation in the VIP section died mid-sentence. Heads turned, backs straightened. In the criminal underworld, respect wasn't given, it was taken, usually at gunpoint. But Alexei Volkov didn't need a gun to command a room. He moved like something predatory, all controlled power in lethal grace. 6'3", maybe 220 of lean muscle, wrapped in a charcoal 3-piece suit that probably cost more than Kat made in 6 months. His hair was black as crude oil, swept back from a face that belonged on a Renaissance painting, all sharp angles and cold beauty. But it was his eyes that made people look away. Pale blue, the color of ice on Lake Michigan in January. Eyes that had watched men die and felt nothing. 6 bodyguards flanked him, moving in synchronized silence, all wearing black suits cut to hide the bulge of shoulder holsters, all scanning the room with the mechanical precision of trained killers. Kat recognized the formation: diamond pattern, maximum coverage, overlapping fields of fire. Her father had taught her to read security details the way other kids learn to read traffic lights. Maxim Petrov walked at Alexei's right hand. The enforcer was built like a heavyweight boxer gone to seed, all thick neck and scarred knuckles. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, the kind of wound that should have killed a man, but instead just made him angrier. He'd been with the Volkov family for 12 years, starting as a leg breaker and working his way up to second in command through a combination of ruthless efficiency and absolute loyalty. Kat was standing near table 4, holding an empty tray, when Rickard materialized at her elbow and shoved her backward. The movement was rough, graceless, designed to create distance between the hired help and the man who paid their salaries. She stumbled, caught her balance, and in doing so stepped directly into Maxim Petrov's path. The collision was inevitable. Kat's shoulder hit his elbow, and the tray, empty but still held in both hands, jolted upward and smacked into a passing waiter's arm. The waiter, a skinny kid named James who'd started last month, jerked in surprise and lost his grip on the tray of champagne flutes he'd been carrying. 8 glasses of Cristal, $500 a bottle, went airborne in a slow-motion arc of golden liquid and crystal. The sound of shattering glass was deafening in the sudden silence. 8 flutes exploded against the marble floor, champagne splashing across Maxim's $3,000 Italian leather shoes. The liquid pooled and spread, turning the white marble dark. Time stopped. Maxim's face went from pale to red in the span of a heartbeat, a flush of rage creeping up his thick neck like spilled wine. His hands shot out and grabbed Kat's upper arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. She felt the strength in that grip, the casual violence of a man who'd broken bones before, and would do it again without a second thought. Glupaya Amerikanskaya suka. The words came out in a snarl, Russian profanity that he clearly assumed she wouldn't understand. Stupid American bitch. Kat's mouth opened, the response automatic, trained into her by a childhood of dual languages and a father who insisted she never forget her mother's tongue. Prostite. Forgive me. The first syllable was already forming when she caught herself, bit down hard on her lower lip, tasted copper. Her teeth clicked together with enough force to send a spike of pain through her jaw. Maxim didn't notice. He was too busy shoving her away, hard enough that she stumbled back 3 steps and hit the edge of a table. But Alexei Volkov noticed. His head turned, those ice chip eyes locking onto Kat with the focus of a sniper acquiring a target. For 3 full seconds, he stared at her. Not at the mess on the floor, not at Maxim, not at the terrified waiter, at her. Kat forced herself to meet his gaze, something instinctive and stupid overriding her common sense. Up close, his eyes weren't just cold, they were empty. Frozen tundra where nothing grew and nothing survived. She saw her own reflection in them, small and distorted, a ghost of a girl in an oversized uniform. Then just as suddenly, he looked away, dismissing her existence entirely, and continued walking toward the VIP section like nothing had happened. Ricard's hand was around her bicep before Alexei disappeared through the velvet curtains, dragging her toward the kitchen with enough force that her feet barely touched the ground. The kitchen was all stainless steel and harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to the golden warmth of the club proper. The door swung shut behind them with a bang that made the hanging pots rattle. Marco, the head chef, and 4 line cooks went silent, their eyes fixed on the cutting boards in front of them. Nobody wanted to be a witness. You just spilled $4,000 of champagne. Rickard's face was 6 inches from hers, spittle flying with each word. His breath smelled like menthol cigarettes and onions. $4,000. I didn't. The words were barely out of her mouth before his open palm cracked across her face. The slap wasn't hard enough to knock her down, but it was hard enough to snap her head to the side, hard enough to split her lower lip against her teeth. The taste of blood flooded her mouth, metallic and warm. Her cheek burned, a sharp sting that would fade to a dull throb by morning. You didn't what? You didn't ruin the boss's entrance? You didn't embarrass me in front of Alexei Volkov? Rickard's face had gone purple, veins standing out on his forehead like vines. You've got 1 chance left, Vance. 1. You're serving tea to Mrs. Volkova tonight, the full traditional service. If you screw it up, if you so much as breathe wrong, you're fired. No final paycheck, no references, and I'll personally make sure every hospital in Chicago knows you can't cover your brother's bills. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Kat tasted blood and swallowed it, feeling the copper slide down her throat. Her face throbbed. Her arm ached where Maxim had grabbed her. And somewhere across the city, Luca was lying in a hospital bed with an IV drip pumping chemicals into his failing body. counting on her to keep him alive for just a little longer. She thought about her options, all 0 of them, and nodded once. Yes, sir. Rickard's expression shifted from rage to something uglier, a kind of satisfied cruelty. He released her arm and stepped back, already turning away as if she'd ceased to exist the moment he stopped touching her. Mrs. Volkova arrives at 9. You have 10 minutes to clean yourself up. Don't let me see that split lip when you walk out there. The bathroom mirror showed a stranger's face. Pale skin gone paler, brown eyes too large in a gaunt face, a purple bruise already forming on her left cheekbone. The split lip had stopped bleeding, but it still throbbed with each heartbeat. Kat wet a paper towel and pressed it against her mouth, wincing at the cold sting. She looked like a victim. Worse, she looked like a victim who would take it and come back for more. The thought made her sick. At 9 p.m. sharp, the private elevator at the back of the VIP section opened with a soft chime. Irina Volkova stepped out like a queen entering her throne room. 72 years old but moving with the rigid posture of a woman half her age. She wore a floor-length black mink coat that must have cost 6 figures, the fur so thick and lustrous it seemed to drink the light. Her white hair was pulled back in an immaculate chignon, secured with what looked like a diamond clip. Red lipstick, gray eyes that missed nothing. The cane in her right hand was ebony wood with a silver wolf's head handle, the kind of antique that belonged in a museum. She didn't need it to walk. She carried it to make a point, to have something to gesture with, to punctuate her words, to remind everyone in the room that she could beat a man to death with it if the mood struck her. Every person in the VIP section stood up, not just the Volkov family soldiers, but the visiting bosses from the Italian families, the Irish crew from Southie, even the politician whose name Kat didn't know, but whose face she'd seen on campaign posters. They stood because Irina Volkova commanded it through sheer force of presence. When she sat, they sat, not before. Alexei crossed the room in 3 long strides and took his mother's hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles in a gesture that looked medieval and somehow perfectly natural. Welcome, Mother. Irina surveyed the room with the expression of someone inspecting a disappointing restaurant. Her nose wrinkled slightly. This place still reeks of cheap beer and desperation, Alexei. Your father would be disgusted. This place generates $8 million a year in clean revenue, Mother. Father would be impressed. Your father built an empire. You maintain a nightclub. But there was no real heat in the words, just the tired ritual of an old argument. Irina settled into the central booth, the throne, everyone called it, and the room exhaled. Tea. I want tea. Kat's hands were shaking as she lifted the heavy silver tray. 15 pounds of antique Russian samovar, porcelain cups thin as eggshells, and a crystal bowl of cherry preserves that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She'd practiced this twice in the kitchen, Marco barking instructions about proper pour technique and the correct angle for presenting the cups. Traditional Russian tea service, the kind that Irina's mother had probably taught her in Brighton Beach, back when the neighborhood was still called Little Odessa. The walk from the kitchen to the VIP section felt like crossing a minefield. Every eye in the room tracked her movement. She could feel the weight of their attention like hands on her skin, pressing down, waiting for her to fail. The tray wobbled once, just slightly, and she corrected with a quick shift of weight. Muscle memory from childhood dance classes she'd taken before everything went to hell. She set the tray down on the table in front of Irina with infinite care, making sure the samovar's base settled silently against the polished wood. The tea inside was the color of amber, steam rising in delicate curls. The scent of bergamot filled the air, cutting through the cigar smoke. Kat poured the first cup with steady hands, added a spoonful of preserves, placed it before Irina with the handle angled at precisely 3 o'clock. Then the second cup, everything exactly as Marco had instructed. She was turning to leave when Irina's voice cracked out like a whip. Wait! Kat froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. She turned back slowly, keeping her eyes down, watching Irina's hands. The older woman had picked up the delicate silver spoon and dipped it into the preserves, lifting it to examine the dark red jam in the chandelier light. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Irina let the spoon drop back into the bowl with a deliberate clink that echoed through the sudden silence. "What is this supposed to be, Alexei?" Her voice had gone cold, flat with contempt. "Do you think I'm some ignorant American who doesn't know the difference?" Alexei's expression didn't change, but Kat saw the slight tensing of his jaw, the way his fingers curled against the armrest of the booth. "Mother, that's imported cherry preserve, $200 per jar. It's garbage." Irina's hand swept across the table in a violent arc. The porcelain cup flew off its saucer, scalding tea spraying through the air in a golden stream. But it didn't hit Alexei. It didn't hit the table. The arc of liquid caught Thomas square in the face and chest. The 17-year-old busboy had been approaching the table with a water pitcher, and now he screamed, a high, thin sound of pure pain as 90-degree liquid seared his skin. The pitcher fell from his hands, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of glass and ice water. Thomas collapsed to his knees, clutching his burned face, tears streaming down his cheeks mixing with the hot tea still dripping from his hair. His whole body shook with the effort of not sobbing out loud, terrified of making more noise, of drawing more attention to himself. Irina rose from her seat like an avenging angel, her face flushed with rage. "Idiots! Incompetent fools! On the anniversary of your father's death, you bring me peasants who can't even serve tea?" She pointed at Thomas with one shaking finger, her voice climbing to a shout. "You ruined my shoes! Do you know what these cost? More than your pathetic life." The cane came up, gripped in both hands now, raised high over Thomas's cowering form. Kat saw it happening in slow motion, the gleaming silver wolf's head at the apex of its arc, the trembling boy on the floor, his hands raised uselessly to protect his skull. Nobody moved. Not Alexei, frozen between respect for his mother and awareness that beating a busboy to death in front of 24 witnesses was bad for business. Not Maxim, his hand hovering near his shoulder holster, uncertain whether the threat was internal or external. Not the other patrons, who'd seen this kind of thing before and knew better than to interfere. Kat moved. "Ostanovitесь!" The word exploded out of her before conscious thought could stop it. "Stop," in Russian. In the specific Brighton Beach accent of the old families, the pronunciation her mother had drilled into her during long afternoons in their cramped apartment, the cadence that marked you as one of the original immigrants, the ones who'd fled the Soviet Union with nothing but the language in their mouths and fire in their hearts. The effect was instantaneous. Irina froze mid-swing, the cane still raised, her gray eyes swiveling to lock onto Kat with laser focus. The entire VIP section went silent, that profound absence of sound that comes when a room full of dangerous people collectively holds its breath. Kat felt the weight of every gaze, felt herself exposed under the harsh light of attention, felt the last 7 months of careful invisibility burning away like morning fog. But Thomas was still on the floor, still bleeding from where shattered glass had cut his palm, still shaking with pain and fear. And Kat couldn't unsay the word, couldn't take it back, couldn't disappear now even if she wanted to. So she did the only thing she could. She stepped forward. "Forgive the boy, matriarch." The words came out in fluent Russian, each syllable perfectly formed, the formal address exactly right for speaking to an elder of respect. Kat kept her eyes down, but her voice steady. "He does not understand the weight of this day. But your anger isn't about the shoes or the tea." Irina lowered the cane slowly, her mouth slightly open in shock. Around them, the room remained frozen, every person waiting to see if this nobody waitress was about to die. Kat took another step forward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. "You're angry because the preserves are wrong. They used refined sugar instead of honey. They didn't add the mint leaf during the boil. It doesn't taste like Brighton Beach in summer. It doesn't taste like 1974, when you were young and your husband was alive and everything was still possible. That's why you're angry. The silence that followed was so complete that Kat could hear the soft jazz music still playing on the stage 40 feet away, could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears, could hear Irina's breathing, shallow and quick, the sound of a woman confronting something she hadn't expected. Then the matriarch spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Brighton Beach. How do you know about Brighton Beach in the 70s? Kat lifted her eyes for the first time, meeting Irina's gaze directly. My grandmother lived there. She taught me the language before she died. She said Russian was the soul, and you couldn't let it die just because the geography changed. It was a lie built on a foundation of truth. Her mother, not her grandmother, but close enough to be believable. Close enough that the emotion bleeding through was genuine. Irina stared at her for what felt like an hour compressed into seconds. Then, incredibly, she laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound, like wind through dead leaves, but it was laughter. She pointed the cane at the empty chair across from her own seat. Sit down, girl. Rickard materialized from somewhere in the crowd, his face the color of old newspaper. Mrs. Volkova, she's just a... Shut your mouth. Irina didn't even look at him. I said sit, child. Don't make me repeat myself. Kat sat. The leather was soft under her thighs, the kind of expensive comfort she'd only ever experienced in other people's spaces. Across the table, Irina studied her like a jeweler examining a suspicious diamond. Alexei had moved closer, standing just behind his mother's shoulder now, and Kat could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. When she risked a glance up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not suspicion, something closer to curiosity, the way a predator might look at prey that had done something unexpected. Maxim, Irina's voice cut through the tension. Bring the chess set. Maxim Petrov looked like he'd swallowed glass. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he managed to form words. Mrs. Irina, we have the union meeting at midnight. The union can wait. Irina didn't even glance at him. I want to see if this girl's mind is as sharp as her tongue. The chessboard that arrived 3 minutes later was a work of art. Marble base, pieces carved from ivory and obsidian, each one weighted and balanced to perfection. The White King alone probably cost more than Kat's monthly salary. Maxim set it down between Kat and Alexei with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact, then retreated to a safe distance where he could glower without consequence. Irina gestured at the board. Play, my son. Alexei raised one dark eyebrow, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something almost amused. Mother, I'm not playing chess with a waitress. You're playing her, or I'm leaving. Irina's voice had gone flat, the kind of tone that didn't leave room for negotiation. Unless you're afraid she'll beat you. Something shifted behind Alexei's eyes, a flash of irritation quickly smothered. He lowered himself into the chair opposite Kat with the deliberate slowness of a man accepting a challenge he hadn't asked for. This close, she could see the faint scar along his jawline, nearly invisible against his pale skin. Old wound. Knife, probably. His cologne was subtle, expensive, something with notes of cedar and smoke. Do you know the rules? His tone suggested he already knew the answer and found it lacking. Or should I explain how the little horse moves? Kat looked at the board. 64 squares. Infinite possibilities. Her father's voice echoed across the years, patient and steady in their cramped Brighton Beach apartment. Chess isn't about strength, Katya. It's about patience. The person who waits longest wins. She'd been 6 years old, barely able to see over the edge of the folding table they used for everything. Meals, homework, tactical planning sessions that she hadn't understood were illegal until much later. I know the rules. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Alexei pushed the white pieces toward her side of the board. Ladies first. She moved her king's pawn forward 2 squares. e4. The most common opening in chess, taught to beginners worldwide, but also the foundation of some of the deepest strategic play in the game. Alexei responded instantly with e5, mirror image, no hesitation. His long fingers moved with practiced grace, setting the pawn down with barely a sound. Cat brought out her knight, nf3. Alexei's knight came out to c6. She developed her bishop to c4, the Italian game, aiming at the weak f7 square. Classic, maybe predictable, but solid. Alexei smiled, thin and sharp as a paper cut. Italian opening, traditional, but outdated. His knight moved to f6, threatening her pawn and developing with tempo. The game accelerated. Alexei played like he fought, aggressively, with no mercy for hesitation. He launched into the fried liver attack, sacrificing his knight on move 6 to blow open her king's position. Around them, people were gathering to watch. Soldiers and bosses forming a loose semicircle, drawn by the spectacle of their fearsome leader engaging in something as civilized as chess with a nobody in an oversized uniform. Cat lost her light-squared bishop on move 8. A voice from the crowd muttered something about it being over already, but she kept her face blank, moving her queen to safety, castling on the king side, building a defensive structure that looked fragile but had roots deeper than Alexei was seeing. He took her dark-squared bishop on move 11, and she heard someone laugh. "You play defense like a coward." Alexei leaned back in his chair, one hand draped casually over the armrest, the picture of relaxed confidence. Cat moved her rook. "I play like someone who knows you'll make a mistake." His eyes narrowed slightly. Good. She'd gotten under his skin, just a fraction. On move 13, she sacrificed her remaining bishop, offering it up like a lamb to slaughter. Alexei took it without hesitation, and she saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. His hand froze halfway back to his side of the board. Her knight moved. Check. Alexei's king stepped sideways, the only legal move. Cat's rook slid down the board. Check again. The crowd had gone silent. Maxim leaned in from his position behind Alexei, his scarred face creased with concentration, trying to see the pattern. Cat could feel sweat beating between her shoulder blades despite the air conditioning. Her pulse hammered in her throat. This was the moment. Either her calculation was perfect, or she was about to humiliate herself in front of 50 of the most dangerous people in Chicago. Alexei studied the board for 30 full seconds. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his ear. When he finally moved his king again, his hand wasn't quite as steady. Cat brought her queen forward, sliding it across the board to land directly in front of his king, protected by nothing, vulnerable to immediate capture. Check. Her voice didn't shake. Small miracles. Alexei stared at the position. If he took her queen, her knight would deliver checkmate from its position 3 squares away. If he didn't take the queen, her bishop... No, wait, she'd already lost both bishops. The rook. The rook would deliver mate from the back rank. Either way, he was finished. The trap had been set 12 moves ago, invisible until the moment it closed. 20 seconds passed. 30. Alexei's hand hovered over the queen, then pulled back. He looked up at Cat, and for the first time since he'd sat down, she saw something other than arrogance in those ice-chip eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition of something unexpected. He reached out and tipped his king over sideways, the universal gesture of resignation. The room erupted. Not with cheers, nobody cheered in the Onyx room, but with a collective exhalation, conversations resuming all at once, nervous energy bleeding off into speculation. Irina clapped her hands together, 3 sharp cracks that sounded like gunshots. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. She gutted you like a fish, Alexei. The old woman's face had transformed, years falling away as genuine pleasure animated her features. That was the Greco gambit, wasn't it? I haven't seen anyone play that since 1982. Alexei stood slowly, his height suddenly imposing now that he was no longer seated. He looked down at Kat, and she fought the urge to shrink back in her chair. This close, she could see the absolute stillness in him, the way a wolf goes motionless before the attack. When he spoke, his voice was soft enough that only she and Irina could hear. "You're not a waitress." It wasn't a question. Kat's mouth went dry. "I need to get back to work. Rickard works for me." Alexei's hand came down on the back of her chair, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. "Which means you work for me now." The air in the room felt suddenly thin, hard to breathe. Kat pushed back from the table, standing up too fast, nearly knocking over her chair in the process. "I don't want trouble." Alexei's smile was all edges. "Too late. You just beat me at chess in front of 50 witnesses. They'll think I'm weak unless I do something about it. So here's what's going to happen." He straightened to his full height, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You're going to accept a job offer. My mother needs a personal companion, someone who speaks the language, someone who can play chess and hold an intelligent conversation, someone observant. I have a job. You have $200 in your checking account and a brother who needs $50,000 for chemotherapy within 6 weeks." Alexei's voice remained soft, almost gentle, which somehow made the words more terrifying. "I know this because I know everything that happens in my city. St. Jude's Hospital, room 447. Luca Brennan, 19 years old, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. His next treatment is scheduled for January 7th. Without it, he has maybe 2 months." The floor seemed to tilt under Kat's feet. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her vision tunneling to a pinpoint. "How do you—" $5,000 a week. You'll live at the estate in Highland Park. I'll cover your brother's medical expenses in full. Treatment, medication, hospital fees, everything." Alexei was watching her face with the intensity of a scientist observing a reaction. "You'll be safe. Your brother will be safe. All you have to do is keep my mother company." It was too much, too fast. Kat's brain struggled to process the numbers, to find the trap she knew had to be hiding in the offer. $5,000 a week meant $20,000 a month, meant more money in 4 weeks than she'd make in 2 years of washing dishes. Meant Luca getting the treatment he needed. Meant survival. It also meant belonging to Alexei Volkov. Meant living in his world, breathing his air, becoming part of the machinery that had killed her mother and destroyed her father. The irony tasted like battery acid on her tongue. Irina reached across the table and took Kat's hand in both of hers. The old woman's skin was paper-thin, spotted with age, but her grip was steel. "Say yes, child, or I'll have Maxim break your legs for wounding my son's pride." The threat was delivered with a smile, but Kat heard the truth underneath. These people didn't make offers. They made demands and dressed them up as choices. She thought of Luca, thought of the way his skin had turned translucent over the past 6 months, the way she could see his veins like a roadmap of dying rivers. Thought about the last time she'd visited, how he'd tried to joke about being bald, tried to pretend he wasn't terrified, tried to be brave for her sake when she should have been the one being brave. "Okay," the word came out as a whisper. "Yes, I accept." Alexei extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment. Long fingers, immaculately clean nails, a thin white scar across the knuckles, before placing her palm against his. His skin was warm, his grip firm, without being crushing. They shook once, and Kat felt the world shift beneath her feet, some fundamental axis tilting toward a new reality she couldn't yet see the shape of. "Welcome to the family, Katerina." Alexei held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing across her knuckles before releasing her. "Maxime will take you home to pack. You start tonight." The Volkov estate sat behind 14-foot walls in Highland Park, 30 minutes north of the city when traffic was light. Maxim drove in silence, the armored Escalade purring through streets slick with melting snow. Kat sat in the back seat, her mind spinning through the implications of what she just agreed to, trying to construct a mental map of the compound based on the brief glimpses she caught between the iron gates. The house itself was a monument to excess. 18,000 square feet of stone and glass, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost a fortune to heat. Security lights illuminated every approach. She counted 12 cameras just on the front facade. The interior was all dark wood and leather, the kind of aggressive masculinity that screamed money and power in equal measure. Her room was on the third floor, East Wing, overlooking Lake Michigan. 400 square feet, which was larger than the studio apartment she shared with Luca before he got sick. The bed was a 4-poster monstrosity with a canopy, the mattress so soft she nearly sank out of sight when she sat on the edge. The closet was already full of clothes, designer dresses still bearing their tags, shoes in her exact size, everything in shades of black and deep blue. Kat stood in the center of the room, hugging herself, trying to process the surreal shift her life had taken in the span of 3 hours. This morning she'd been invisible. Tonight she was living in a mansion. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. A soft knock on the door. Irina entered without waiting for permission, moving with that rigid back posture that made her seem taller than her 5'4" frame. She'd removed the mink coat, revealing a black dress that probably cost more than a used car. "Tomorrow we begin properly." The old woman settled into the armchair by the window with a sigh of relief that suggested her back hurt more than she'd let on downstairs. "Tonight you sleep. But first, tell me the truth. Your grandmother didn't teach you Russian. Who did?" Kat's throat closed. She'd prepared for this question, rehearsed the answer in the car, but faced with Irina's sharp gray eyes, the lies felt flimsy. "My mother. She was born in Brighton Beach. She taught me when I was young, before she died." "How did she die?" "Bomb. Outside a bakery, 2008. They never caught who did it." The words came out flat, drained of emotion through sheer repetition. Kat had told this story to police, to social workers, to grief counselors, to anyone who asked. After 16 years, it was just facts, data points in a case file that never got solved. Irina was quiet for a long moment. "And your father?" "Dead 8 years, prison, cancer." The lie came easier than the truth, that Arthur Brennan had been framed by the very organization Kat now worked for, that he died alone in a cell, disgraced and abandoned by the agency he'd served. Some stories you couldn't tell without burning down the world around you. "I'm sorry for your losses." Irina stood, crossing to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "But I'm glad you're here now. Sleep well, Katerina." The first 3 days were a test. Kat understood that much. Irina had her read aloud from Tolstoy in the original Russian, correcting her pronunciation with the precision of a music teacher tuning an instrument. They played chess every afternoon, and Irina won 6 games out of 10, revealing a strategic mind that age hadn't dulled. They ate dinner together, Irina, Alexei, and Kat, at a table that could seat 20, but felt oddly intimate with just the 3 of them. Alexei watched her constantly, not obviously, not in a way that felt threatening, but she could sense his attention like heat from a fire. He asked casual questions over dinner. Where had she grown up? What books did she read? Did she prefer Chicago winters or summers? And listened to her answers with an intensity that suggested he was cataloging every word for later analysis. On the 4th night, after Irina had retired to bed, Alexei invited Kat to the library for a drink. She followed him through corridors lined with art worth more than most people's houses, into a room that smelled like old leather and wood smoke. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls, a fireplace big enough to stand in. He poured cognac from a crystal decanter, handed her a glass without asking if she wanted it. "You haven't told me the truth about who you are." He settled into the chair across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. making him look simultaneously younger and infinitely older. Kat's hand tightened on the glass. I told you. You told me your mother died in a bombing. Your father died in prison. You work as a waitress to pay for your brother's treatment. All true, I'm sure, but incomplete. Alexei swirled the cognac, watching the liquid coat the sides of the glass. Your accent isn't just Brighton Beach. It's Brighton Beach diplomatic families. The way you hold yourself isn't waitress posture. It's training, self-defense maybe, something military adjacent. And the way you spotted that sniper last week. I didn't spot a sniper. The words came out too fast, too defensive. Alexei smiled. No one said anything about a sniper. Interesting. Kat cursed herself silently. She'd walk straight into that one. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me who taught you to see threats before trained bodyguards do. Who taught you to play chess like a grandmaster? Who taught you to speak Russian like someone's mother drilled it into them every single day for years? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because that's not the skill set of a waitress, Katerina. The fire crackled in the silence. Kat weighed her options, measured the distance to the door, calculated how fast she could run before he caught her. But running meant giving up the money, giving up Luca's treatment, giving up the only lifeline she had. My father was a diplomat. The partial truth felt like acid in her mouth. He was posted in New York, worked with the Russian immigrant community. He wanted me to understand our heritage. When my mother died, he got paranoid, started teaching me things, how to watch for danger, how to think strategically. He said the world was cruel, and I needed to be ready. She met Alexei's eyes. He died thinking he'd failed to protect us. I don't know if that's true, but I know I'm tired of being helpless. Alexei studied her for a long moment. Your father's name was Arthur Brennan. It wasn't a question, but Kat nodded anyway, her heart hammering. My father mentioned him once, called him an honorable enemy, said Brennan only went after people who deserved it. Alexei stood, walked to the window overlooking the grounds. But you didn't come here to avenge your father. You came here to save your brother, which means you're practical. I respect that. Kat didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The cognac burned going down, spreading warmth through her chest that did nothing to ease the cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. There's a gala tomorrow night, Mayor's annual charity event. I need you to come with me. Alexei turned from the window, silhouetted against the darkness outside. Wear something nice. Stay close. Listen to conversations. You're good at being invisible when you want to be. Use that. You want me to spy for you. I want you to be my eyes and ears in a room full of people who smile while planning my death. He crossed back to her, refilled her glass even though she'd barely touched it. Marco De Luca will be there, Italian family. We've had a truce for 2 years, but someone tried to kill my mother last week. I need to know if it was him. The weight of what he was asking settled over Kat's shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just playing companion to a lonely old woman. This was walking into the heart of a gang war, unarmed and unprepared, and hoping not to get caught in the crossfire. What if I say no? Then your brother gets his treatment anyway, and you stay here reading to my mother for $5,000 a week. Alexei's expression didn't change. But I think you won't say no. I think you're tired of being helpless, like you said, and this is a chance to have power. Real power, the kind that keeps people safe. He was right, and they both knew it. Kat had been powerless for so long. Powerless to save her mother, powerless to help her father, powerless to cure Luca. That the mere suggestion of control over anything felt intoxicating, dangerous, addictive. Okay, I'll do it. The Navy Pier Grand Ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. 500 guests in evening wear, champagne flowing like water, an orchestra playing Vivaldi on a stage draped in white silk. Kat had never been anywhere like it. The dress Alexei's stylist had picked out made her feel simultaneously elegant and exposed. Midnight blue silk that clung to her frame, a neckline that showed collarbones and the hollow of her throat, her hair swept up in an elaborate twist that had taken the woman 40 minutes to construct. Alexi's hand rested on the small of her back as they entered, the touch light but possessive. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than her car, his hair slicked back, his face a mask of polite indifference. They made their way through the crowd, stopping every few feet for him to exchange pleasantries with politicians and business owners and people whose names Kat didn't know, but whose faces she recognized from news articles about corruption and money laundering. Marco DeLuca held court near the bar, a short man with an expensive smile and dead eyes. He saw Alexei approaching and spread his arms wide, the picture of warmth. "Alexei, my friend! I'm so glad you came." DeLuca's embrace was all performance, the kind of hug that meant nothing and warned of everything. "And who is this beautiful creature?" "My fiancée, Katerina." Alexei's hand tightened fractionally on Kat's back. "Katerina, this is Marco DeLuca." Fiancé. The word hit her like a slap, but she kept her expression neutral, extending her hand to DeLuca with a smile that felt like broken glass in her mouth. "Pleasure. Terrible business about the shooting last week." DeLuca's grip lingered just a moment too long. "Your mother is well, I hope?" "Perfectly well, thank you for your concern." Alexei's voice could have frozen nitrogen. Of course. If there's anything my organization can do." DeLuca let the offer hang in the air, a trap disguised as generosity. Kat watched his eyes while they talked, the way they kept darting to his watch, checking the time with the nervous frequency of someone waiting for an event. 4 times in 10 minutes. That wasn't normal anxiety. That was anticipation. She filed the observation away and excused herself to find a drink, leaving Alexei to continue the dance of threats masquerading as conversation. The crowd parted for her more easily than she'd expected. Maybe it was the dress, or maybe it was the fact that she'd arrived on Alexei Volkov's arm. Either way, she was invisible in a new way, not ignored but categorized as ornamental and therefore safe to dismiss. She used the cover to drift through conversations, catching fragments about real estate deals and union negotiations, about shipments delayed at the port and palms that needed greasing at City Hall. She was near the balcony doors when she heard Russian, low voices, careful and quick. 2 men smoking in the cold, their backs to the windows. Kat moved closer, pretending to admire the view of the lake while straining to hear through the glass. Tonight, when they returned to the estate, the first voice was deep, gravelly. "The west gate will be open. New security codes were changed this afternoon." "And the old woman?" The second voice made Kat's blood freeze. She knew that voice. "Maxim. Kill her too. Moscow's syndicate wants the entire family gone. 5 million down, 10 more when it's done." Kat's heart stopped, then started again, too fast, slamming against her ribs hard enough to bruise. Maxim, Alexei's second-in-command, the man who'd worked with the family for 12 years, who Alexei trusted with his life. Maxim was planning a coup. She turned too fast, her heel catching on the marble floor. The champagne glass in her hand tilted, spilling golden liquid across the front of her dress and shattering against the ground in a spray of crystal fragments. The sound cut through the ambient noise like a gunshot. Both men on the balcony spun toward the windows. Kat didn't wait to see if they'd recognized her. She ran, or as close to running as she could manage in heels and a tight dress, weaving through clusters of startled guests. She had to find Alexei, had to warn him before they left the gala, before they drove back to the estate, before the trap closed around them like teeth. She found him near the stage, still talking to DeLuca, his expression mildly bored. Kat grabbed his arm hard enough to wrinkle the fabric of his jacket, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. Their eyes met, and whatever he saw in her face made his whole demeanor shift. The boredom vanished, replaced by lethal focus. "We need to leave. Now." She pitched her voice low, urgent, leaning in close enough that her lips nearly brushed his ear. It's a trap. Home. They're waiting. Alexei didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, didn't waste time on explanations. He turned to DeLuca with an apologetic smile that looked absolutely genuine. My apologies, Marco. My fiancé isn't feeling well. We should go. Of course, of course. These events can be overwhelming. DeLuca's smile didn't waver, but his eyes were calculating, trying to determine if this was real or theater. They were in the car 3 minutes later, Alexei driving his own Ferrari this time. No bodyguards, no escort. The engine roared to life, and they shot out of the parking garage doing 60, the force pressing Kat back into the leather seat. Talk. Alexei's voice was flat, empty of everything except the need for information. Maxim, I heard him on the balcony. He's working with Moscow Syndicate. They're hitting the estate tonight, 2 a.m., the West Gate. He changed the security codes. The words tumbled out in a rush, adrenaline making her tongue clumsy. Alexei's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping near his ear. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. You're sure it was Maxim? I'd stake my life on it. You just did. He took a corner doing 70, the tires screaming. The Westgate codes are only known to 3 people, me, my mother, and Maxim. If he's turned, we can't trust anyone at the estate. We go in through the old wine cellar access. It's not on any security grid. What about your mother? She's safe. Her rooms are reinforced. Steel doors, panic button direct to a private security firm I pay under the table. They'll have people there in 3 minutes. He glanced at Kat, a brief flash of something that might have been respect. You just saved our lives. I won't forget that. The estate was dark when they arrived. Only the perimeter lights on, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. Alexei killed the headlights a half-mile out, coasting the Ferrari to a stop behind a maintenance shed. The silence when he cut the engine was absolute. He opened the trunk, pulled out a tactical vest and 2 handguns, handed one to Kat. She stared at the weapon like it might bite her. I can't. You can. Safety here, trigger there, aim center mass. His voice left no room for argument. We're outnumbered and outgunned. I need every advantage. Can you shoot? Her father's training echoed across the years. 8 years old, learning to handle a .22 in the controlled environment of an FBI practice range while other kids were playing soccer. 12 years old, graduating to a 9mm. 16 years old, putting 3 rounds through the center of a target at 30 yards. Arthur Brennan had believed in preparation for a hostile world. Yes, Kat took the gun, checked the magazine automatically, chambered around. The weight felt familiar in her hands, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. Alexei watched her with new eyes. Your father taught you more than chess. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, following a path only Alexei knew, through overgrown gardens and past sculptures worth more than most houses. The wine cellar entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the pool house, the kind of thing that belonged in a spy movie, but apparently was standard for the paranoid rich. The tunnel beyond was narrow, damp, smelling of earth and old wine. Kat's heart hammered as they climbed the stairs into the basement of the main house. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every creak of old wood sounded like footsteps. Alexei moved with silent grace, the gun in his hand held low and ready, his body language speaking of training far beyond what most civilians possessed. They found the first bodies in the kitchen. 2 guards, throats cut, blood pooling on the white tile floor. Fresh kills, less than 10 minutes old. Kat swallowed bile, forced herself to keep moving. She'd never seen a corpse before tonight. Now she'd seen 2, and something in her brain noted with clinical detachment that she wasn't screaming or vomiting or having a breakdown. Just following Alexei through a house full of death, a gun in her hand, ready to add to the body count if necessary. The second-floor hallway was worse. 3 more guards, shot at close range, slumped against the walls in positions that suggested they'd never seen it coming. Alexei's face had gone perfectly blank. all emotion locked down beneath a mask of ice. He checked each body, confirming they were dead, taking their weapons. The door to Arena's suite was reinforced steel disguised as mahogany. Alexei keyed in a code, and it swung open with a hydraulic hiss. Empty. The bed untouched. The panic room in the back closet open, also empty. They took her. Alexei's voice was flat, deadly. They took my mother. A sound from downstairs. Voices, speaking Russian. Alexei moved to the hallway, Kat following, and they looked down over the railing to the grand entrance hall below. 8 men, heavily armed, tactical gear, and in the center, holding a glass of Alexei's own whiskey, stood Maxim Petrov. "Welcome home, boss." Maxim's voice echoed up through the cavernous space. "I was hoping you'd make it. It's more poetic this way." Alexei stepped to the railing, making himself visible, his gun trained on Maxim's center mass. "Where's my mother?" "Safe, for now. Moscow syndicate has her. They want to talk terms." Maxim set down the glass, spread his hands in a mockery of openness. "You've been sloppy, Alexei. Too independent. The old families in Moscow don't like it when American branches start thinking they can operate without approval. They want regime change. And you sold us out for what? Money?" Alexei's finger tightened on the trigger. "Money, power, the promise I won't die in some alley with a bullet in my brain." Maxim shrugged. "You're a good boss, Alexei, but you're not immortal. And I got tired of waiting for you to figure out you can't win forever." The 8 men raised their weapons, aiming up at the balcony. Alexei pulled Kat back behind the wall just as gunfire erupted, bullets chewing through plaster and wood, filling the air with dust and the acrid smell of cordite. They ran, staying low, moving through the upstairs corridors toward the east wing. Alexei grabbed Kat's wrist, pulling her into a bedroom, slamming the door behind them. "There's a service staircase. Leads to the garage. We can get to the cars." "No." Kat's brain was working faster than it had any right to, fueled by pure adrenaline. "They'll expect that. We need leverage." "We don't have leverage." "Yes, we do." She turned to face him, breathing hard. "Maxim thinks you don't know about the betrayal, but we do. Which means he hasn't changed all the security codes yet. Just the West Gate. The armory. Does he have access?" Understanding lit Alexei's eyes. "The armory has biometric locks. My fingerprints. He can't get in without cutting off my hand." "Then that's where we go. We arm ourselves properly, we fortify, and we wait for his next move. He can't blow up the whole house, not with your mother's location unknown. He needs you alive to negotiate." They made it to the armory through what felt like a miracle of luck and timing. The room was a gun enthusiast's wet dream. Assault rifles, submachine guns, body armor, enough ammunition to outfit a small army. Alexei grabbed an HK-416, tossed a Kevlar vest to Kat, started loading magazines with the efficiency of long practice. The attack came at midnight. Maxim's men tried to breach the armory door, but it was reinforced steel designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Alexei picked them off through the firing ports, 3 quick shots that dropped 2 men and sent the others scrambling for cover. The firefight lasted 8 minutes and ended with 4 dead mercenaries and Alexei taking a bullet to the shoulder, the round punching through the gap in his vest. He went down hard, blood spreading across his white shirt in an ugly blossom. Kat grabbed him, dragged him behind a stack of ammunition crates, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the damage. Through and through, missing bone, but bleeding badly. She stripped off her jacket, wadded it against the wound, applied pressure while Alexei gritted his teeth hard enough to crack enamel. "You have to call for help." His voice was tight with pain. "Code in my phone, speed dial 1, private security." Kat found the phone in his jacket pocket, slick with blood, dialed with shaking fingers. The line picked up on the first ring. "Volkov, emergency line. This is Katerina Brennan. We're under attack at the Highland Park estate. Alexei's been shot, multiple hostiles. We need extraction now. Copy. Units en route. ETA 12 minutes. Stay on the line. 12 minutes. Kat looked at Alexei, pale and sweating, his hand pressed over hers on the makeshift bandage. Looked at the door, where more footsteps were approaching. 12 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. The voice came through the door. Alexei, let's be reasonable. You're bleeding out. Your mother's a hostage, and you're surrounded. Surrender now. I'll make it quick. You have my word. Alexei's laugh was wet, pained. Your word means nothing, Maxim. Then I'll make you listen to her scream. The old families have ways of making people talk. Your mother's tough, but everybody breaks eventually. Kat saw Alexei's face twist with rage and helplessness, saw him try to stand and fail, his legs buckling. She made a decision in that moment that she knew would change everything. Stood up, walked to the intercom system on the wall, keyed it on. Maxim, this is Katerina Brennan, Arthur Brennan's daughter. Silence on the other end, then laughter. The FBI agent who tried to destroy us? The one we framed and killed? That Brennan? The same. And I have a deal for you. You give us Irina's location, safe passage out, and I'll give you information worth 10 times what Moscow is paying you. What information could a waitress possibly have? I have my father's files. Everything he knew about Moscow's syndicate operations in the U.S. Names, dates, account numbers, blackmail material on 3 senators and a federal judge. I've kept them as insurance. You want them? You let us walk. She was lying through her teeth, praying Maxim was greedy enough to believe it. The files existed. She'd found them in her father's effects after he died, but they were in a safety deposit box in Detroit, and she hadn't looked at them in 8 years. More silence. Then, you're bluffing. Am I? Your friends in Moscow will be very unhappy when they find out Senator Richardson's wife used to work for them as a money launderer, or that Judge Chen has been taking bribes since 2019. How long do you think they'll keep paying you when I burn their whole American operation to the ground? She could almost hear Maxim thinking through the intercom, weighing odds, calculating risk. Alexei was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between shock and admiration. Fine, you want the old woman? She's at the foundry, Gary, Indiana, the old steel plant, 6 a.m. Alexei comes alone. You bring the files, we make the trade. The line went dead. Footsteps retreated. 30 seconds later, the sound of vehicles starting, driving away. Kat's legs gave out and she collapsed against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Alexei pulled himself up, one hand clamped to his shoulder. You just lied to a killer about leverage you don't have. I know. And you named me as the delivery method, guaranteeing he'll expect me to walk into a trap. I know. That was either the stupidest thing I've ever seen or the bravest. He limped over to her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his body, despite the blood loss. Which one was it? Kat met his eyes. I don't know yet. The private security team arrived in 11 minutes, not 12. 8 men in tactical gear, medics with them, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done extractions before. They stabilized Alexei's shoulder, got him into one of the armored SUVs, and had the estate locked down within 20 minutes of Kat's call. But they were too late to catch Maxim. He'd vanished like smoke, taking his mercenaries and leaving behind only corpses and the wreckage of trust. Northwestern Memorial Hospital at 3 in the morning was a strange kind of purgatory. Too late for visiting hours, too early for the day shift. Kat sat in a plastic chair outside the OR while surgeons worked on Alexei's shoulder, her dress still stiff with his blood, her hands scrubbed clean but still feeling dirty. The adrenaline had worn off an hour ago, leaving her hollow and shaking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bodies in the kitchen. The guards slumped against walls, the spray of arterial blood when Alexei's bullet found its mark. She'd killed no one herself. Small comfort. She'd been ready to, had held the gun with steady hands, finger on the trigger, waiting for a target. The realization that she was capable of that, of ending a life to preserve her own, sat in her stomach like a stone. A doctor emerged at 4:30, still wearing surgical scrubs spattered with red. He's stable. The bullet missed the brachial artery by maybe half an inch. He's lucky. Or you're good at field dressing wounds. My father taught me. The words came automatically, before Kat could think better of them. The doctor gave her a long look that suggested he was seeing more than just a woman in a bloody dress. But he didn't press. He'll need 6 weeks for the bone to heal properly. Physical therapy after that, but he should regain full range of motion. They let her see him 20 minutes later. Alexei was awake, propped against pillows that looked absurdly white against the pallor of his skin. The hospital gown made him look younger, more vulnerable. An IV drip ran into his left arm. His right shoulder was wrapped in enough bandages to stop a small caliber round. You should go home. Sleep. His voice was rough, scraped raw by whatever they'd used to intubate him during surgery. Kat pulled a chair to his bedside. I don't have a home anymore. Your estate is a crime scene, and my apartment lease ended 3 months ago. I've been sleeping on a friend's couch when I wasn't working. Then sleep here. He gestured vaguely at the other chair with his good hand. I'm not going anywhere for a while. Might as well have company. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the distant sounds of the hospital waking up around them. Finally, Alexei spoke, his eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles. Maxim worked for my father before he worked for me. 12 years of loyalty. I trusted him with everything, and he sold us out for what? Money? The promise of power? The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint. I should have seen it, should have known. You can't know everything. Kat heard the exhaustion in her own voice. People hide what they want to hide. My father spent his whole career reading people, and he still got blindsided by the frame job. By the time he figured out who'd betrayed him, he was already in cuffs. Alexei turned his head to look at her. The files you mentioned, your father's intelligence, do they really exist? Yes, safety deposit box in Detroit, Bank of America, on Woodward Avenue. I haven't opened it since his funeral. She met his gaze. I don't actually know what's in them. Could be everything I said, could be nothing, could be recipes for borscht. But Maxim believed me, and that's what mattered. A ghost of a smile crossed Alexei's face. You bluffed a professional killer with imaginary leverage while I was bleeding out on the floor. That takes either courage or insanity. Or desperation. Kat leaned back in the chair, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she was. I didn't think, I just acted. And now we're committed to walking into a trap at 6 a.m. with nothing but hope and whatever plan you can come up with in, she checked the wall clock, 90 minutes. We're not going to Gary. Alexei's voice had firmed up, the weakness from blood loss fading as whatever painkillers they'd given him kicked in. Maxim wants me to walk into the foundry alone so he can execute me and blame it on Moscow Syndicate. Make himself look like the loyal soldier who tried to save the family. That's his play, so we don't give it to him. Then how do we get your mother back? We don't, not yet. He reached for the phone on the bedside table, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder. We need leverage, real leverage this time, and I know where to get it. The next call he made was to someone named Victor, not Maxim, a different Victor. Apparently the Volkov family had a surplus of them, who ran operations in Detroit. Kat listened to half the conversation in Russian too rapid for her to fully follow, catching only fragments about safety deposit boxes and courier services and the need for absolute discretion. When Alexei hung up, he looked more alert than he had any right to be, given the hole in his shoulder. Victor's sending someone to the bank when it opens. Your box number? Kat rattled it off from memory, along with the access codes. What if there's nothing useful in there? Then we improvise. But your father was FBI. Even if he got burned, he was good at his job. I'm betting he kept insurance. Alexei shifted in the bed, trying to find a more comfortable position. Moscow Syndicate isn't just a criminal organization. It's a network. Politicians, judges, business owners, all interconnected. Your father would have documented those connections. That's what good agents do. And if we expose them, then Moscow has to choose between protecting their American assets or burning them to protect themselves. Either way, it gives us room to negotiate. He pressed the call button for the nurse. I need to be discharged AMA. We have work to do. The nurse who appeared 3 minutes later took one look at Alexei, trying to pull out his IV, and physically pushed him back against the pillows. She was maybe 5'2" and outweighed by 100 pounds, but she had the authority of someone who dealt with stubborn patients before. Mr. Volkov, you were shot 4 hours ago. You're not going anywhere except back to sleep. I'm discharging myself against medical advice. It's my legal right. It's also stupid, which seems to be a theme tonight. She glanced at Kat. Talk some sense into him, would you? But Kat understood the calculation Alexei was making. Every hour they waited was an hour Irina spent in enemy hands. Every minute of delay increased the chance that Moscow would decide she was more valuable dead than alive. Time wasn't a luxury they could afford. He's going to leave whether you approve or not. Can you at least give him something for the pain that won't make him useless? The nurse muttered something uncomplimentary in what sounded like Tagalog, but she returned 15 minutes later with discharge papers, a prescription for antibiotics, and a shot of something she claimed would keep him functional for 6 hours before the crash hit. Alexei signed the forms one-handed, got dressed in clothes one of his men had brought, and walked out of the hospital moving only slightly slower than normal. They drove to a warehouse in Cicero, one of the dozen properties the Volkov family owned through shell corporations and dummy LLCs. The building looked abandoned from the outside, broken windows, graffiti on the walls, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. Inside was a different story: state-of-the-art security, climate control, and enough weapons to outfit a small militia. 12 men waited in the central bay, all loyal to Alexei, all survivors of last night's purge. They stood when he entered, a gesture of respect that seemed to give him strength. He walked to the center of the group, favoring his injured shoulder, but refusing to show weakness. Maxim Petrov is a traitor. He's working with Moscow's syndicate to stage a coup. He has my mother. We're getting her back. Alexei's voice carried through the warehouse, commanding attention. But we're not doing it on his terms. We're not walking into his trap. We're going to hit him where he doesn't expect it, with leverage he can't counter. And we're doing it tonight. One of the men, a broad-shouldered guy with a shaved head, spoke up. Boss, we're outnumbered. Maxim had 40 men last night. We've got 12. The math doesn't work. The math works fine if we're smarter. Alexei moved to a table where someone had spread out a map of the Gary Foundry. Maxim's expecting me to show up at 6 a.m. alone. He'll have men positioned here, here, and here. The main entrances, the high ground, the exits, standard ambush formation. But there's an old drainage system running under the factory from the river. Built in the 30s, hasn't been used since the plant closed. It comes up inside the main smelting floor. He traced the route with his finger, the movement precise despite the injury. 4-man team goes in through the drainage tunnel 3 hours early while it's still dark. You set up firing positions in the catwalks. Wait for my signal. When I give it, you light them up from above while I engage from ground level. Crossfire. They won't know which way to shoot. And if they kill you before you can signal, then you kill them anyway and get my mother out. But they won't. Alexei looked at each man in turn. Maxim wants a public execution. He wants me to beg. He'll monologue, explain his brilliant plan, savor the moment. That's when we strike. The plan was insane. It relied on too many variables, assumed too much about enemy positioning, left too little margin for error. But it was also the only plan they had. Kat watched the men absorb it, saw them nod one by one, accepting the mission because Alexei Volkov had asked them to, and that was enough. What about me? Kat's voice sounded small in the cavernous space. Alexei turned to her. You stay here. This isn't your fight. Like hell it isn't. I'm the one who made the deal with Maxim. I'm the one who promised files I may or may not have. If I don't show, he'll know something's wrong. She crossed her arms, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Plus, you're operating with one arm. You need someone to watch your back. You're not a soldier. No, but I can shoot. I can think under pressure. And I just spent the night proving I'm willing to do what's necessary. She held his gaze. You said yourself, you need every advantage. I'm an advantage. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. Then Alexei nodded once, sharp and decisive. Fine, but you follow my orders exactly. No heroics, no improvisation. You do what I tell you when I tell you. Understood? Understood. The courier from Detroit arrived at noon with a manila envelope sealed with evidence tape. Alexei opened it with a knife, careful not to damage the contents. Inside were photocopies, dozens of pages, bank statements, photographs, typed reports in the dense bureaucratic language of law enforcement. Kat recognized her father's handwriting in the margins, notes and observations that painted a picture of deep cover corruption. Senator Richardson's wife, Judge Chen, a police commissioner in Philadelphia, the deputy director of the DEA, names and faces, dates and dollar amounts, a web of compromise stretching across 3 states and 2 federal agencies. Arthur Brennan had been building a RICO case before he died, documenting everything with the obsessive thoroughness of someone who knew he might not live to see it through. Alexei read in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. Finally, he looked up, meeting Kat's eyes. Your father was going to bring down half the federal government. He was going to bring down the people who deserved it. Kat's throat felt tight. These are the same people who framed him, the ones who made it look like he was on the take, when really, he was trying to expose them. Moscow's syndicate couldn't let this get out, so they burned him first. Alexei carefully stacked the pages, slid them back into the envelope. This is leverage, real leverage. We leak this, Moscow's entire American operation collapses. They'll give us anything to keep it quiet. Then we use it. Kat stood, feeling something hard and cold settling in her chest. We make the trade, your mother for the files, and then we burn them anyway. Alexei smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf spotting wounded prey. I knew I liked you. They spent the rest of the day preparing. The tactical team left at 2 p.m., taking the long route to Gary, scouting the drainage access, making sure the old maps were still accurate. Alexei rested, conserving energy, his shoulder packed with ice to keep the swelling down. Kat tried to sleep and failed, her mind racing through scenarios, calculating odds, preparing herself for what came next. At 4:30 a.m. the following morning, they loaded into the Ferrari. Alexei drove despite his injury, one hand on the wheel, the other resting carefully in his lap. The highway was empty at this hour, just them and the occasional semi-truck hauling goods through the pre-dawn darkness. The Gary Foundry looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic film. Rusted steel skeletons of old smelting equipment rose against the pre-dawn sky, girders twisted by heat and time into surreal sculptures. Broken windows gaped like missing teeth. The parking lot was a maze of potholes and invasive vegetation. The whole place smelled like rust and decay. Alexei parked the car half a mile out, killing the lights. The tactical team had gone in 3 hours earlier, using the drainage tunnel to position themselves in the catwalks without being seen. Now it was just him and Kat, walking toward the main entrance as the eastern horizon began to lighten with the promise of sunrise. Kat wore body armor under a jacket too thin for the November cold. The Glock rode in a shoulder holster, a weight she'd grown accustomed to over the past day. Her hands were steady. That surprised her more than anything else. She'd expected to be terrified, shaking, useless. Instead, she felt cold, focused, like some part of her had finally stopped pretending to be helpless and accepted what she was capable of becoming. The main doors stood open, a rectangle of darkness against darker shadows. They stepped through together, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The interior of the foundry was a cathedral of industrial decay, the ceiling lost in shadows 40 feet overhead. Old machinery hulked in the darkness like sleeping beasts. And in the center of the floor, illuminated by battery-powered work lights, sat Irina Volkova. She was tied to a metal chair, duct tape across her mouth, but her eyes blazed with fury when she saw them enter. Alive, unharmed from what Kat could see, that was good. That was the first piece of luck they'd had all night. Maxim stepped out from behind a rusted crane, applauding slowly. Punctual. I appreciate that in a condemned man. And you brought the girl. Even better. I was hoping for a chance to tie up all the loose ends at once. He wasn't alone. Kat counted 8 men in tactical gear, all armed with assault rifles, all positioned to cover the various approaches. Not as many as she'd feared, but enough to make the odds deeply unfavorable in a straight fight. I brought the files. Alexei held up the envelope, his injured arm hanging at his side. Everything Arthur Brennan documented. Names, numbers, evidence that could put 20 people in federal prison. You give me my mother, I give you this. Everyone walks away. Except you don't really think I'm going to let you walk away, do you? Maxim moved closer, his boots echoing on the concrete. I mean, come on, Alexei. You're smart enough to know how this ends. I get the files. I kill you and the girl. I tell Moscow Syndicate that you died trying to rescue your mother. And I take over the family with their blessing. It's a perfect plan. There's a flaw. Alexei's voice was calm, almost conversational. Yeah? What's that? You told me the plan before executing it. Classic villain mistake. Alexei's good hand moved to his waist, and for a second, Kat thought he was going for his gun. But instead, he pulled out a small black device, a detonator. See, while you were busy preparing this ambush, my men were busy planting shaped charges on every support column in this building. I press this button, the whole structure comes down. We all die, but at least I take you with me. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. They hadn't had time to rig the building, but Maxim didn't know that, and the uncertainty flickered across his face like shadows from a candle flame. You're bluffing. Am I? You want to bet your life on it? Alexei's thumb rested on the button, casual but present. Here's my counteroffer. You give me my mother, you walk away with the files, and you use them to leverage Moscow Syndicate into leaving us alone. Tell them we have copies. Tell them if anything happens to any member of my family, this all goes to the FBI, the DOJ, and every newspaper in the country. Mutually assured destruction. The Cold War worked on that principle for 40 years. Maxim's face had gone through several interesting color changes. Moscow won't accept that. They want you dead. Moscow wants to protect their assets. These files threaten their assets. They'll take the deal because they have to. Alexei took a step forward, and Kat saw him wince as the movement pulled at his shoulder. Or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. You've got 10 seconds. The silence was broken by a new voice, older and rough with cigarettes and bad decisions. I'm afraid that's not how this works, Mr. Volkov. A man stepped out of the shadows behind Irina. Late 50s, gray hair, expensive suit that looked out of place in the industrial wasteland. Kat recognized him from the photographs in her father's files. Anton Morozov, head of Moscow Syndicate's American operations, the man who'd ordered the bomb that killed her mother. Anton. Alexei's voice had gone flat. I should have known you'd be here. Did you really think we'd let Maxim handle this alone? He's proven himself useful, but he's not exactly a strategic thinker. Morozov moved around Irina's chair, trailing one hand along the back. The files are interesting. A complication, but not insurmountable. You see, the people named in those documents, they're already compromised. They'll do what we tell them to do, including burying any investigation that might arise. So your leverage is somewhat less impressive than you think. Then why are you here negotiating instead of shooting? Because loose ends bother me, and you, Mr. Volkov, are a very troublesome loose end. Morozov pulled a pistol from his jacket, a small .380 that looked almost delicate in his hand. He pressed it against Irina's temple. Here's how this actually ends. You give me the files. You give me the detonator, which we both know is fake. And then you and the girl get on your knees while my men execute you. In exchange, I let your mother live. She's old. She'll die naturally in a few years. It's the best deal you're going to get. Kat felt the moment crystallize around her, felt all the variables collapse into a single point of decision. They were going to die. Alexei's bluff had failed. The tactical team in the catwalks couldn't fire without hitting Irina, and there were too many guns pointed in too many directions for any kind of heroic escape. In approximately 60 seconds, she would be dead, and her last thought would be that she'd failed. Failed to save Irina, failed to save herself, failed to keep the promise she'd made to Luca that she'd come home. Then she noticed something. A detail so small she almost missed it. The steam pipes running along the foundry ceiling were old, corroded, held together by what looked like prayer and rust. And directly above Morozov's position, one of them had a pressure valve, the old-fashioned kind with a wheel handle, probably original to the 1950s construction. It was maybe 30 feet up, accessible from the catwalks where Alexei's team waited. Kat caught Alexei's eye, glanced up at the pipe, then back to him. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted fractionally. He'd seen it too, understood what she was thinking. It was insane. It probably wouldn't work, but it was the only option they had. Okay. Alexei's shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. You win. Here. He tossed the envelope toward Morozov, the pages scattering as it hit the ground. Morozov's eyes tracked the movement, following the envelope, and in that half-second of distraction, Alexei keyed his radio with the hand hidden behind his back. The gunshot came from above, sharp and precise, not aimed at Morozov or his men, aimed at the pressure valve on the steam pipe. The valve exploded in a shriek of tortured metal and superheated steam, a geyser of scalding vapor erupting from the ruptured line. It fountained down directly onto Morozov, who screamed and stumbled backward, his gun clattering to the floor as he clutched at his face with blistered hands. Chaos erupted. Morozov's men turned toward the threat from above, opening fire on the catwalks where muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Alexei was already moving, throwing himself toward Irina's chair despite his injured shoulder, hitting it with enough force to topple both of them to the floor behind a piece of heavy machinery. Kat drew her weapon. Maxim managed to get behind a steel support column, returning fire with a submachine gun, bullets sparking off metal and concrete. Kat crouched behind an old furnace, hands shaking now, the adrenaline finally hitting her system with enough force to make her teeth chatter. She saw Maxim moving through the smoke, circling around toward where Alexei was trying to cut Irina free. Saw him raise the submachine gun, saw the angle that would let him shoot Alexei in the back. Didn't think, just acted. Kat came around the furnace firing, the Glock bucking in her hands. Most of the shots went wide, sparking off the floor and walls, but one caught Maxim in the thigh. He went down hard, the submachine gun skittering away across the concrete. Their eyes met for a second, his filled with shock and rage, hers empty of everything except the cold certainty of what came next. Alexei appeared behind Maxim, his own weapon drawn, and fired twice. Center mass. Maxim jerked, coughed blood, and collapsed. Kat looked away before she could see him die, her stomach churning, bile rising in her throat. The shooting stopped. Morozov was down, writhing in agony from the burns, his face a mass of blistered tissue. 3 of his men were dead, the rest surrendered or fled. Alexei's team descended from the catwalks, securing the space with professional efficiency. Someone cut Irina free, peeled the duct tape from her mouth, and the first words out of her were Russian profanity, creative enough to make the hardened soldiers blush. Kat sat down hard on the floor, her back against the furnace, and started to shake. The gun felt impossibly heavy in her hands. She'd shot a man, maybe not killed him, Alexei had done that, but she'd pulled the trigger with the intent to harm, to stop, to end. The realization that she was capable of that sat in her chest like broken glass. Alexei limped over, his face gray with pain and exhaustion, and lowered himself to sit beside her. His shoulder was bleeding again, the bandages soaked through. "You saved my life. Again." "I shot someone." Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "You protected your family. There's a difference." He took the gun from her trembling hands, safed it, set it aside. "I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but you did what you had to do, and I won't forget it." Irina appeared above them, wrapped in someone's jacket, looking small and furious and very much alive. "Both of you, up! We're leaving before the police arrive. And Alexei, you look terrible. We're going back to the hospital." They left the foundry as the sun crested the horizon, painting the rust-streaked walls gold and red. Morozov was loaded into an ambulance, arrested on multiple charges the moment the paramedics stabilized him. The files went to the FBI field office in Chicago, delivered by courier with a note explaining their provenance. By noon, federal agents would be executing search warrants on half a dozen locations. By evening, 3 senators would be under investigation. Within a week, Moscow Syndicate's American operations would be in shambles. 3 days later, Alexei was released from the hospital with strict orders to rest and attend physical therapy. The Highland Park estate had been cleaned, new guards hired, new systems installed. That evening they sat in the library, fire crackling in the hearth, darkness pressing against the windows. Alexei poured cognac one-handed and looked at Kat with an expression she'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was about to offer something important. "You could walk away now. Take your brother and disappear. I'd pay for his treatment anyway. You've earned that much." "But," Kat knew there was a but coming, "but I'm offering you something else. A real position in the organization, not just companion to my mother, an advisor, a strategist, someone who sits at the table when decisions are made." He met her eyes over the rim of his glass. "You're good at this, Katerina, better than you should be, and I trust you, which is not something I say lightly." Kat thought about the girl she'd been a week ago, invisible, powerless, scrubbing dishes and clearing tables and hoping each day would be enough to keep her brother alive a little longer. That girl was gone, burned away in the fires of the foundry. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd killed to protect what mattered. "What about Luca? He can't know about any of this." "He won't. He'll think you got a job in finance. High-paying, respectable. We'll set up a cover story that holds up to scrutiny." Alexei leaned forward. "But I need to know if you're in, really in. Because once you say yes, there's no going back. You'll be one of us, with everything that entails." Kat looked at the fire, watching flames dance over blackened wood, thought about her father, who tried to do the right thing and died for it, thought about her mother, collateral damage in a war she'd never asked to be part of, thought about herself, standing in an abandoned foundry with a gun in her hand, making split-second decisions about life and death. "I'm in." The words felt right, settled into place like puzzle pieces. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." 6 months passed in a blur of transformation. Luca's leukemia went into complete remission, the experimental treatment working better than anyone had dared hope. He started community college, studying computer science, healthy and whole, and blissfully ignorant of what his sister had become. Kat visited him weekly, maintained the fiction of her finance job, and told herself the lies were worth it to see him smile. The Onyx Room reopened under new management, cleaner now, legitimate investors replacing the criminal element. And on a cold spring evening, Kat stood in the VIP section wearing a white dress that cost more than her old apartment's annual rent. She'd changed in ways that went beyond expensive clothes and professional styling. She carried herself differently now, moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she could be when necessary. The ceremony was brief, efficient, devoid of religious overtones because neither of them believed in gods anymore. Just vows witnessed by family and the few people in the world they actually trusted. Luca sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Irina sat beside him, resplendent in black lace and diamonds, playing the role of doting grandmother with surprising enthusiasm. When the officiant pronounced them married, Alexei kissed her with a kind of intensity that made the crowd look away. And Kat felt something unlock in her chest that she'd kept closed for 16 years. That night, they stood on the balcony of their penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The city spread below them like a kingdom they'd fought for and won. Alexei wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Any regrets? Kat thought about everything she'd done, everything she'd become, the blood on her hands, literal and metaphorical, the lines she'd crossed that could never be uncrossed. Every day, but I do it all again. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd come to know better than her own. Love isn't always light, Alexei. Sometimes it's the darkness we choose to embrace together. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose us. He kissed her then, soft and sure, and somewhere in the city, Moscow's syndicate was regrouping, planning their next move. Somewhere, new threats were forming. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Katerina Volkov, formerly Brennan, formerly nobody, formerly invisible, stood in the darkness and knew herself completely. Not a victim, not a pawn, a queen who'd learned to move in ways her enemies never expected. The city lights glittered like promises and threats in equal measure, and she was ready for both.